Hello and welcome to this course on how to master objections. My name is David Craig White and I will be your instructor for today. For those of you who don't know me, as I said, my name is David Craig White. I'm a sales trainer and startup consultant, and I teach people how to sell their products and services and make more money. I've spent 25 years as a salesman and solopreneur. I've done 18 years in B2B sales, where I've worked for software sales companies, tech startups, as we call them. During that time, I've generated more than $7 million in new business revenue, personally myself. I've also helped multiple startup companies raise in excess of $40 million in series funding. And I've trained more than 5,000 people across 120 countries during that time and period as well. I've also made mistakes, like all of us. I've been personally bankrupt. I've been fired before. I've started companies that didn't work out. And it's these things, the good and the bad, which I want to be able to obviously share with you and help you learn, of course, from the bad things, but also learn from what's worked for me throughout my career. Just before we move on, I've dropped a link here to my LinkedIn profile. If anybody's interested who's watching this in connecting, please feel free to send me a connection request and I will happily connect with you there on LinkedIn. Okay, so who's this course for today? This course is for learners of all levels, and particularly anybody who struggles with objection handling at any stage in your sales conversations. So if you're doing cold calling and struggling with objections in those first sort of 60 seconds of a call, gatekeepers, etc., or maybe you're struggling at the end of your sales conversations when you're trying to close a deal or negotiate with handling objections, then this course is for you. So all people of all levels who struggle at any stage in that sales process with trying to handle objections. My objectives for today are that by the end of today's course, that you will have a proven framework, what you're comfortable with using, which will enable you to turn objections into opportunities and win more customers. Agenda. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you today about the tools needed to master objections. We're going to talk about the definition of what an objection actually is. I'll then share with you the 3 types of objections there are. And then we'll go through the common buyer objections, of course, some of them. And what I'll do then when we do that is also share with you sort of typically what they are in regards to which one of the 3 types they fall under. And then once we've done that, we'll move it straight into the 6-step objection handling process, where I will share with you the exact process you can use for any objection, to handle any single objection. And then we'll wrap up with an exercise. I'll give you some homework to do at the back end of this, what you'll be able to then submit to me via email at the end of the course. All right, so I always say there's 3 tools you need in order to be good at mastering objections. Yeah, 3 tools. And those 3 tools are as follows. The first one is products and industry knowledge. You don't need to be a complete product expert in your own product, especially if you're working with very technical products, etc. I don't expect you to have to know everything in very minute detail, but you will require some form of product and industry knowledge if you want to be good at handling objections, because very often you're going to call upon that knowledge when you do get a specific objection to be able to respond to it and handle it. So that is number 1, first and foremost, good product knowledge, good industry knowledge. The good news is you don't need 25 years experience as a salesperson or selling things to be able to pick up these, right? Because knowledge is generated by how much energy and effort you put into learning new stuff. So I truly believe you can literally learn the same as what let's say somebody who's been in sales for 10 years, you could learn the same as them within, I would say, a few months if you're putting in the extra effort, which typically most people don't do. All right, next, good questioning techniques. I'll share with you a couple of those during this session. But you will need to have some form of good basic questioning techniques, because that is going to be part of that 6-step process I talked about. In general, if you don't have good questioning techniques, you're going to struggle with sales as a whole. But in particular with objection handling, you need to be able to apply just a couple of specific questioning techniques for you to be able to sort of understand the objection, but also be able to overcome and turn the objection around. Last but not least, confidence. You might be new to sales. You might not have done sales for a long time. You might be struggling right now with handling objections. So your confidence might be low. You might not feel too confident that you can overcome every objection. You do what I say when I say you need confidence as one of these main tools. It's because you need to appear confident when handling objections. Okay, you might not feel confident inside when doing so, especially in the beginning. Hopefully after today, you will feel a bit more confident in being able to apply the things, what I'm going to teach you. But you need to appear confident when you're handling objections. Yeah, especially if we're talking at the beginning or the end of the sales process, because if you don't come across as confident, then that's going to count against you. Okay, so these are the core 3 things I would say are most important when it comes to being able to successfully master objections and objection handling. So what is an objection? Now there's a good question, right? First, I'm going to share with you what an objection isn't, because I think that is first and foremost most important. And this is the mistake most people make, is assuming that an objection is something that it actually isn't. And the first thing I will say to you is an objection is not a rejection. Yeah. Yes, on some occasions, it can be kind of a rejection. But the worst thing you can do is always think when you get an objection, oh, it's over. I'm done with. It's done. It's a rejection. They've said no. Because that on most occasions isn't the case. Okay, so you really need to switch your mindset when it comes to objections, because objections are good. Yeah, first and foremost, even if it is a no, you've got closure, and closure is good, right? You want to get closure rather than chasing somebody for weeks on end to find out that they're not going to go ahead anyway. So any form of closure in sales is a good thing. But I would say to you, don't think as an objection as a rejection, because most of the time, like I said, it's not. What I say an objection is typically, on most occasions, is a request for information. Yeah, and this is why I say to you that you should not have this mindset that when somebody raises an objection, it means they're rejecting you, because most of the time what they're asking for is more information. They're asking for maybe clarity on what you've told them, just a bit further information, which is of course a very positive sign. So always think of a rejection as a request for information rather than it being an actual rejection. Okay? Objections are also sometimes a way for your buyers to slow down the process. So you might have had a really good initial call and the prospect starts to get really excited about what you've shown them or what you've told them. And then you sort of start to follow up and, you've already given them a price, you've kind of agreed on a follow-up, and then all of a sudden they cool off. Yeah, this is very classic in sales. Very classic, especially after a very good first call. Then you chase up after that call sounds really good and you think you've got a hot lead. And then you follow up and they either delay that follow-up or they don't respond to you, or they get on a call and they just like super cool. Yeah, they've cooled down a lot. So it's no longer a hot prospect. It seems like it's a very cold prospect all of a sudden. And that's because sometimes what they just need you to do is just slow down a little. So you can move too fast sometimes in the sales process. And it's not just you, it is also the buyers what do that. And then they realize what they've done after, and they maybe sort of get a bit of buyer's remorse before they've even purchased. And what they'll do is then really slow down. And part of them, a strategy for them to slow down is actually just to throw some objections at you. Yeah, so understand that and process it and think about that when you are getting objections, is that sometimes it's just almost a request for you to just slow down, maybe roll back a couple of steps and just restart the process a little bit. And here's a very important one. Objections are also buying signals, a lot of the time actually. Yeah. So that's why I say to you that you should look positively at objections and not treat them like a rejection, because they are essentially buying signals on quite a lot of occasions. If somebody's requesting more information from you, or somebody's requesting clarity on something you told them or something you shared with them, that's a good signal. Yeah, because that means they're still very interested, and that means they're just wanting a bit of extra information before they proceed further in the conversation or maybe with making the decision to buy. So, of course, objections at the beginning of a sales process, maybe if you're doing cold calling, like those are very typically maybe not buying signals, especially if you're dealing with gatekeepers. But if you're dealing with the right person and you've got past maybe that first call, and especially if you're at the end of the sales process, if you've done your job right, then objections very often are actual buying signals. All right, so let's move on and talk about the three types of objections. I would say, I just mentioned there, of course, buying signals. I think they're also a kind of type of objection, but there's three other core types of objections, which I think, if I was to call them buckets, maybe, all objections come under these kind of three buckets of objections. So let's just go through each one, and I'll share with you sort of what I mean when I talk about these types. So the three types quickly. The first one is smoke screens. The second one is real objections. And the third one is brick walls. Okay, so let's just dig into each one of those and I can explain to you exactly what I mean. Smoke screen. A smoke screen is an objection where it's not the real objection and there's an objection behind the smoke, basically. Yeah, so, and this I will say to you is the most common type of objection there is, smoke screens. Yeah, so very often somebody will raise an objection which isn't actually their objection, which is why we need to get good at asking questions, because what we're going to need to do is figure out, how do I get to the real objection behind the smoke screen? So that is a smoke screen objection. Next, we have the real objections. And real objections usually come in the form of a question or a statement. And these are what I would say are usually sort of the real requests for information. And this could be anything from just objections about pricing, about payment terms, maybe about some terms in your contracts, etc. So these real objections are the most common ones you'll deal with in regards to whatever you're selling, and you'll over time become used to sort of the same ones. You know, there may be sort of 3, 4, 5 real objections what you get to deal with every time with your product or service what you're selling, and these are the ones where you just need to stay calm, read into them, understand what they are, be prepared for what your answer is going to be and how you're going to handle them as well. But these typically, the real objections are, of course, the ones what we want to get really good at handling, because these very often are those positive ones which lead us to the ultimate sale in the end. And then we've got the brick walls. Now, the brick walls are things you can do nothing about. A common example of a brick wall would be if I'm a bank advisor and I'm selling loans and you come to me for a loan, but you have bad credit. That's a brick wall. Yeah, if you have bad credit and CCJs and whatever, like, you can do nothing about that in regards to getting a loan, and I can do nothing about that. Now, could we try and battle our way through it and try and find a way around that? Yes, we could try. It's not very likely we would manage to come to a decent solution. If we did, it would maybe not be a perfect solution, and that's going to end up with unhappy customers. It's going to end up with unpaid bills, or it's going to end up with customers who just churn after the first year, which nobody wants. Okay, so brick walls, hopefully you'll only have sort of maybe 2 or 3 types of brick wall objections, what you come up against. But you should just remember that if you come across those specific brick wall objections, like, try and just move on. Yeah, don't put all your energy and effort into trying to overcome these brick wall objections, because most of the time, like I said, it ends up not being a good fit anyway. Okay, so let's move on and talk about just a few of the most common buyer objections. And then what I want to do as we go through these is I want to just talk about which types of objections these typically are. What bucket would they come under? So you've got a better understanding there of my the thinking behind the types of objections. First one, it's too expensive. Now, this, of course, could be a real objection, but what you've always got to think about when you hear an objection is, does that make sense? Or is there some more context behind that objection, what I would like to get? And when somebody says it's too expensive, then my default brain just says, what does that mean? Yeah, and I know, the ultimate thing is like, oh, it means they don't have the budget most of the time. But it also could mean that they don't see the value in it. That's why they're saying it's too expensive, because maybe they're comparing it to something else. So that is what would make this particular objection what I would call the smokescreen. Yeah, because they're giving you the smokescreen, they're telling you it's too expensive, but we don't actually know what that means right now. So therefore, we need to get past the smoke to find out what the actual objective is. So then we would dig into that to see what's behind it. We're not interested. Again, another common one. You'll get that more often than not at the beginning of a conversation. And again, this is a classic smokescreen. Yeah, because again, it's very vague. We're not interested. What does that mean? Okay, I know it means you're not interested, but there's a reason behind that, which is, like I said, what makes this a smokescreen again. Yeah, so again, I want to dig further. I want to try and understand, are they not interested because they're busy? I caught them at a bad time. Are they not interested because they already have a vendor, or they just went with some? Are they not interested because they don't have the budget? It could be one of many, many reasons, which is obviously the real objection, what is lying behind the smokescreen. So therefore, we're not interested is usually always a smokescreen. We're happy with what we have. Now, I would say this borderlines between a sort of real objection and a smokescreen. Yeah, if somebody says we're happy with what we have, that could just be a real objection. Yeah, they might have had a vendor for a couple of years. They're extremely happy. There's no pain associated to the problem or what that vendor's helping them solve. So that could be a real objection. But we don't just let it go that easily, right? Because there could also be a smokescreen. Yeah, there could be more detail behind this, which tells me that, okay, you're happy with that, but what does that mean? Does that mean you're just trying to get me off the phone and tell me you're happy with your vendor? So we still want to try our best where possible to find out, okay, is this a smokescreen? Can I get more information behind what they've just, the statement they've just said to me? Next, we can already do that. Now, you'll probably get this more, maybe not so much when you're selling services, but when you're selling products in particular. I've spent a lot of time selling software sales, tech startup technology products. And when you're selling technology, then you will bump into some of these companies who are like, we can already do that, or we can do that ourselves. That's not a real objection as such. That for me is definitely a smokescreen. Sometimes it turns out to be a brick wall, because some companies, that's what they do. They never buy, they always try and build themselves, and that's just their policy, and it's very difficult to get past. So this objection could be any one of those three. And of course, when we dig into the 6-step objection process, then you'll understand how we can help you sort of isolate which type of objection it is by asking questions to find out more details. Is that your best price? Now, this is definitely not a brick wall. This is definitely not a real objection most of the time. Very small fraction of the time, this could be that. This is a smokescreen, and this is definitely one of those where I would also categorize this very often as a buying signal. Yeah, so if somebody asks you, is that your best price? Very often salespeople, their brain says, oh no, it's too expensive. But that's not what this question or this objection usually is about. This is usually about this what lies beneath this, which is why I call it a smokescreen, is basically somebody saying that I'm ready to go ahead, I just want to negotiate. Yeah, so that's where this objection comes from. So I would say this is one of the objections you would love to hear on every call, ultimately. And of course, we treat it as a smokescreen because we want to find out what's beneath that. Maybe they have some competitor pricing where they're trying to compete, get your price down based on that. Maybe they have a problem with your payment terms, upfront payments instead of monthly, whatever it may be. But of course, we need to get behind this question and figure out what makes you ask that question, which is why this is a smokescreen. Okay, so now the framework. Yeah, so I'm going to take you through a simple 6-step framework, what you can use to handle any objection at any stage in your sales conversation. And this is the same framework I've been using for many years to be able to handle objections and, of course, take them and convert them into opportunities and closed business. So the 6 simple steps. And the first one, what I'll start with is, it might sound like an obvious one, but the first one is listening. And I'm not just talking here about just listening. What I'm talking about is hearing the objection and digesting the objection. So objections can come in lots of different forms. They might come in a question, they might come in a statement, they might come at a different pace, at different stages in the sales process. And they can also come in a different format and context level. So you might, for example, get a really long objection, which has like multiple layers to it. And that means that you're going to have to sort of understand when you do that, like what part of that should you be digesting and responding to in this particular process. So let me show you an example here. So I just noted down an example here of what an objection might sound like if it was really contextual and delivered by somebody who sort of delivers over information, let's say, when they tell you stuff. So somebody could say, we're really busy right now and our budgets have been cut, but I think we're happy with our current supplier. Maybe call back in the new year. Now, if you're not listening to that and digesting what's been said and you just respond straight away, then you're probably going to respond to the thing, what you heard maybe at the end of the statement or the sentence. So in this particular scenario, you might tag on to maybe call me back in the new year and handle that as an objection and focus on that. Or I think you probably would focus on the fact that they said we're happy with our current supplier. Now, what I'm hearing here, if I really sort of digest what's been said before responding, is I'm going to isolate and sort of try and filter out the noise. Now, we're really busy right now. That's just noise. Maybe call back in the new year. That's just noise. So I'm probably going to highlight something down the lines here that I can hear that their budgets have been cut and they're happy with their current supplier. And I'm probably, in this particular scenario, I'm probably going to focus on we're happy with our current supplier. But I could also focus on the budgets as well. So here's sort of where listening really, really is important when responding and listening to objections in the first step. So I just wanted to make a statement here as well and let you know that like a reactive response to objections is going to get you in trouble. Yeah, you have to really pay attention to the speed, the tone, and the words what are being used by the buyer. Yeah, because those things will dictate sometimes what type of objection you're dealing with. And again, timing, I would say, is another one, whether it's the beginning of the process, end of the process, etc., etc. Okay, now step 2, and this is something what's going to buy you time when it comes to handling objections. So when I said to you before about listening and digesting, if you're quick enough to be able to listen and sort of respond to what's been said by repeating it back, then this is going to help you with pausing for a short second after you've heard the objection. So if somebody comes up with an objection and you listen to what they've said, let your brain process it, then what you're going to do is you're going to feed it back to them. Yeah, so you're going to respond and you're going to try and ideally add some clarity to what's been said as well, especially if it's like this one, what I just talked to you about. So if somebody says, I'm really busy right now and our budgets have been cut, but I think we're happy with our current supplier, maybe calls back in the new year. If I'm going to repeat that back, I'm not going to repeat that entire statement back. Yeah, what I might do is just isolate one particular point and say, okay, so you've got a current supplier at the minute. Yeah, and that's where I'm going to then start the conversation and take it from there. So that is what I mean when I talk about repeating back, is listening to what's been said, repeating back, and sometimes where necessary, obviously adding some clarity and taking away the noise when you do repeat back from what's been said. Next is you ask a question. Yeah, so this is where you really start to get behind the smoke screen and start to get to the detail. So if I've just repeated back, in a way, when I do repeat back, I'm using a closed-ended question there. So I'm using a question which gets a yes or a no. Yeah, and if you've not taken any of my other courses before, then you'll know that I always talk about using open and closed-ended questions, when you use the closed-ended question, you do it to get a yes or no answer on purpose, because I'm locking down something here. I'm saying, okay, so you've got a current supplier. Yes, excellent. That takes me to then what I will typically ask next, which would be an open-ended question, which ensures that I don't get a response which is a yes or no. This is where I start to try and open up the dialogue and find more information, what's behind this smokescreen objection, which is typically what you're dealing with. Okay, so you're going to ask a question here, a simple open question, and it's important to note here that you will go back and forth quite a lot. So don't expect, I know it's 6 simple steps, but step 2 and 3, you might need to ask, I don't know, 2-3 questions here for you before you can actually get to that objection, what is beneath the smokescreen, or isolate the objection, the real objection, or the brick wall you're dealing with. So don't be expecting that it's just one simple repeat back, ask one question, move on, because you're going to have to spend a little bit of time here in this particular area. Okay, next. Answer, provide an answer. Yeah, so once you've isolated what the true objection is, so let me just roll back again so we can try and stick to this case here. So somebody says, we're really busy right now, our budgets have been cut, but I think we're happy with our current supplier, maybe call back in the new year. I'm going to feed that back to them and say, okay, so you've got a current supplier right now? And they're going to be like, yes, we do. And then I'm going to ask my open question, be like, okay, can I just ask, like, who are you with currently? Yeah, and then I'm going to go back and forth a little bit. I might ask some questions there in regards to, like, hey, and what do you like about your current supplier? Okay, and is there any things you don't like about your current supplier? So then I'll go back and forth between that first sort of step 2 and step 3. And once I've isolated something in regards to that, then I'm going to then provide the answer. So in this particular scenario, if I find out something that they like about the supplier and then something they don't like in my questions, then I provide an answer. And that answer in this particular case could be something like, right, well, just so you know, we've been in the market just as long as your current supplier, and we do actually have a couple of things what you mentioned there what you're not currently getting. And that's where you would then sort of, that's your answer, what you would provide in this scenario. Okay, so once you provided your answer, we move on to the next step, which is the heat check. Yeah, so if I'm going to tell them that I have a couple of features or I have a couple of service elements, what we can offer them, what they don't currently have, then a heat check question is a question what you ask to get a sense on, is this person maybe ready to commit? Are they ready to have more conversation? Or sometimes if you're dealing with an objection where it's about terms, conditions in a contract, you might ask a heat check question, which is just like, does that answer all of your questions, or do you feel comfortable with the answer I provided there? Or are we ready to progress past that? Are you happy with what I've told you, basically? So that's an example. So there's a couple of different types of heat check questions what you could ask, but ultimately what you're checking is, have I answered your objection, and can we move on to the next steps, which is step 6, which is next steps. So one thing I will say here, when you get to having provided an answer, asked a heat check question, and then you get to the final step, as soon as you've got confirmation in that heat check question there that, like, yes, that sounds okay, then move on quickly. Yeah, don't try and clarify and just double check. Don't be insecure, I guess is what I'm saying. A lot of people, they provide an answer to an objection and they're really insecure and they want to sort of just double check and make sure, are you really sure? Did you have any other questions? Can I send you some more information on this? And it kind of then almost, you get yourself out of that objection and then you pull yourself back into it. So try and avoid making that mistake. Once you've provided an answer, ask a heat check question, make sure, does that sound okay for you? Yes, it does. Excellent. Next steps. Okay, then I guess the next steps are, I'm going to send you an agreement and we'll get started at the start of next week. And then we move on from there. Yeah, so don't go back in these steps. Once you close the door, treat it like Sandler would call the submarine, right? Take every step. When you go through, close the door, lock the door, move on. I would also use that sort of same methodology here when using the 6-step objection handling process. So it's too expensive. How would I handle that if it was to just give you a good example of following those steps? If a prospect says it's too expensive, I'm going to feed that back and I'm going to say, so you think it costs too much? Prospect's going to say yes. Then I'm going to say, is this because you don't have the budget or because you don't see the value in what we do? That will be a really good open question to ask. Prospect might then be very open and say, yeah, we don't have the budget right now. And then I might respond by say, would it help if I could offer payment terms? Prospect is like, yes, that could work. And then I can then say, if I can get that approved, are you ready to move forward? Yeah, so that would be sort of my heat check question. Would it help if I could offer payment terms would be my answer. So what I've done here is sort of blended the two steps into one question. But this would be typically how I would handle the it's too expensive objection. And you can see here, this is a very simple flow. It's just about you having the confidence to be able to respond very quickly. It's about the confidence and the knowledge to know what to ask. It's about understanding that what you're receiving in the beginning is usually a smoke screen. So here, it's too expensive. It's a smoke screen. I feed it back and I don't say, oh, so you think it's too expensive? I say, so you think it costs too much? Yeah. And then my next question after that is to obviously isolate and say, well, is that because you don't have the budget or because you don't see the value in what we offer? Yeah. So what I'm by using that open-ended question, which is step 3, what I'm doing at that point is I'm isolating the objection. So then I know exactly what I'm dealing with here. Do they not have the budget or do they not see the value in what we do? Yeah. And when they say the budget, what they kind of say there is I have the budget, but I do see the value, but I don't have the budget. Yeah. And then my answer to that is to check if, hey, would it help if I offered payment terms? So that kind of itself is an answer and a heat check. And then what I'm doing after I get confirmation on that is moving on. Hey, if I can get approval on that, are you ready to move forward? Which is kind of like a heat check moving into those next steps. Yeah, so that would be how it's done. It requires some practice. It's not something you'll be able to just pick up on the spot and just execute from day one. It does require practice. I would definitely recommend role-playing this. I would recommend writing down some of the things and your responses in particular to some of the objections you get in your job. And that is also part of the exercise, what I've put at the back end of this, this session. So we'll jump to that now. Before I do, I want to make a very important point here. And that is that silence is deadly. What do I mean when I say this? I mean that if you're in a sales process with somebody and you're having a demo call, or you're having a meeting with them, and they're just agreeing with everything you say, and they don't raise any objections, that's a bad sign. Yeah, so I started off this session by mentioning to you that objections are a good signal. Yeah, it's good to get objections. And this is the opposite, right? This is like, if you don't get objections, it's very bad. Yeah, so don't think for a second that if you have one call with somebody and it seems to go perfect and they don't have any questions or raise any objections at all, don't think that that means you've got an easy sale. Most of the time, that just means that your buyer isn't being honest. They're not asking you what they want to ask you. So always, where possible, if you can sense some uncertainty in your buyer, then don't be afraid to raise objections yourself and use them as what's called an upfront objection. You can actually raise the objection for the buyer if you know it's highly likely it will come up, or maybe it's already on their mind. Okay, so silence is deadly. And as I just mentioned, rule number 1 of objection handling, yes, we've got those 3 skills what you need to have, to be good at handling objections. And what I would layer on top of that is be prepared. Yeah, and that's part of the exercise what we'll talk about now. So what I'm going to do is, this is the end of the session. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you got a lot of value and you feel a bit more comfortable now about how to handle objections. This is this is theory, of course. Now we need to go to a level of practicality where you're executing on this theory. And part of that is this exercise. So what I want you to do after this is finished is I want you to write down the top 3 objections that you come up against all the time. You can use some of those examples I gave you before, or you can pick some of the top 3 objections you always deal with. I want you to write down how you would repeat those back. Yeah, so again, like I said, if somebody says it's too expensive and that's something you get all the time, how are you going to repeat that back to them? As you obviously saw how I did it before, but how would you do it? And then the third thing is like write down the question you would ask to challenge. Yeah, so that's step 3, the question, what you ask them, the open-ended question. What open-ended question would you ask first after sort of repeating back the objection, what you've just heard? Okay, so those are the 3 simple steps. I would try and spend at least 10 minutes on this exercise. And what I want you to do is email the answers to me. I'll respond to everybody and give you some feedback, whether, you know, if they're correct, great. If they could do with being tweaked a little bit, I'll be upfront and honest with you. I'll let you know that. So drop me an email, dcw@davidcraigwhite.com. I want to know the 3 objections you commonly deal with. I want to know how you repeat those back, and I want to know what's the first open question you would ask after repeating and isolating the objection. What's the question you would ask to sort of isolate what's behind the smoke screen or whatever objection it is you're dealing with. So, and here's a few examples, as I mentioned before. So it's too expensive. We're happy with what we have. I'm not interested. Is that your best price? We're going to put this on hold. So there's just a few objections, what might be common for you. Feel free to pause the video, write some of these down if you want to use some of my examples. But like I said, it would be even better if you know you've got specific examples you'd like to get some feedback on, then please use those ones and send those ones to me. On top of the exercise, of course, you're always welcome to send me any questions via email as well. So if you have any questions about the course, if you have feedback about the course in particular, I'd love to hear them. And I'd love to get that feedback. So don't hesitate to drop me an email there with any questions or any feedback following the course. And I guess that is a wrap for today. So I will say thank you very much for investing your time and your attention into this particular course on how to master objections. I hope to see you again at some point in either in my LinkedIn inbox as a connection request, in my mailbox when I get your emails, or maybe in one of my other courses as well. So thank you once again, and yeah, we'll catch up again and see you again soon. Bye for now.